Father of the famous Peter Brock, and certainly involved in his race team and behind the scenes, not only involved in his family, but obviously involved in what he did as a race driver and a couple of the family teams and other dealings that he had along the way, which is going to be fascinating to hear that. Joe Felice obviously was Holden's motorsport, or manager of motorsport, from 1968 to 1979. So the notoriety of Joe is very interesting because Holden Dealer Team is really a brand that we all know and we all refer to. It doesn't really matter what age group you are, and Joe was, instrumental in starting that. So we'll start off and having a chat to you, Joe. What came about? How did that happen?
Well, early in the piece, actually, there was another team which was called the Holden Dealer Racing Team, and that was run by a guy called David Mackay. And at the time, Harry Firth was parting company with Ford because they brought Al Turner in from America, and we decided that we'd try and do a deal with Harry because Harry was obviously, for those of you who know Harry, Harry's the sort of person that doesn't forget and doesn't forgive, and he wanted to come to Holden, so we did a deal. We also decided at the time that we would, as a factory, we would get directly involved in the motorsport side of the business, even though we had a non-motor racing policy, which was actually smoke and mirrors. We did a deal with Harry, brought him into the fold, and got rid of the other gentleman. I had to go up to Sydney and sort of say to him, look, you're no longer the manager, and get our company car back. And he hated us forevermore. And we went with Harry, and Harry, for his time, was an excellent engineer, an innovator, everything else. I mean, later on it kind of, and I'll tell the story later on, that it kind of passed him by. But at the time, Harry was excellent. We brought him into the team. We were running, at that stage, we ran the Monaros. That was the first Harry thing where it was at Sandown. We ran the Monaros at Sandown, then we ran the Ampol Rally, where we went all around Australia and ran Monaros again. And that's how it sort of all started. And it was kind of a situation where officially we went out and got a lot of sponsors, but officially we said that the General Motors money was used for rallies and rallycross, and the sponsors' money was used for motor racing, which is a whole lot of bullshit, of course. It all came out of one pot, but that's what we had to do from a corporation point of view, because the company was split in half. You had the people who were for motor racing, and you had the people who were against motor racing. So you sort of had to do it all by smoke and mirrors, and there was stuff going out of the plant like you wouldn't believe, and everyone was nudge, nudge, wink, wink, and turn a blind eye. But that's how we kind of got going. Later on, we decided to go with the Torana. Mainly we were actually rallying Torana, and some of our corporation friends said to us, look, with the Monaro's too obviously a big, powerful race car, and you're starting to run foul of the corporation overseas. So we made the decision that we would make Torana our main competitions car, and that's how we sort of came up with the XU1, etc. And we started running the Torana because we felt that nobody believed that we could compete against the big GTHOs with a little Torana. Of course, in '72, as Lewis will tell you, we were lucky. It's just one of those things. Anyone who's involved in motorsport, things have to go your way. And in '72, we actually won Bathurst with the XU1. We shouldn't have, but we did. The weather was on our, let's say, the gods were smiling us with the weather. Ford had a few problems, and Peter did an excellent job, and obviously we won the race.
Actually, Lou, if I could just get you to ask your opinion of '72, wasn't it because it was really just the warm-up process of the XU1 Torana that perhaps gave it that winning edge?
Okay, I think what Stephen is referring to, in '72, I was a university student living in Parkville in Melbourne, And I got a phone call from Peter, and he said, look, I've got to run this car in. You know, do you feel like going for a drive down the coast? We'll go down to Apollo Bay and back. And
in the race car.
This is the race car. So he rolled up outside my place,
and Joe obviously didn't know.
I didn't know about this, by the way.
So he rolled up, and I jumped in the car. I mean, I was pumped, and all my university friends are going, "Oh my God, look at this!" So we drove down through Geelong, down to the Great Ocean Road, along that beautiful road. If those of you who've driven it will know, it's just a superb piece of road. We just had radial tyres. I think they raced in radials anyway. We did have a purpose. We had to run the engine in, but, you know, it was just great fun. And there was that element of motor racing which was just fabulous, you know, getting involved. I was involved peripherally, but I was involved like that, and it was really good fun. But the factory weren't really aware of it.
As long as they got the receipt for the fuel to give to Harry, would have been right.
That would have been the dearest motor car of all time. I tell you, we built those cars in the engineering department. But in those days, believe it or not, we actually, including me, we used to run, and probably Dick will tell you this too, we used to actually run the cars up. We'd drive them up to Bathurst. We'd drive brake pads. Harry would write out a sheet and tell us, you know, 10 stops over 20 kilometres, and we'd actually run the pads in on the way up to Bathurst. And that was normal, you know, it wasn't anything unusual. And we actually drove the cars up there back in those days. We didn't even have a transporter. You look at the transporters these days and they're fabulous, you know, they're like a hotel, but we just had a dirty old Bedford van that I'd used for a promotion for our Indigenous friends. When they finished with it, I gave it to Harry. I said, Harry, use this to... And Harry put a 6-cylinder engine in it, because it only had a 4-cylinder Bedford engine. Harry put a 6-cylinder engine in it, and he used to throw the trailers with it. But in those days, that's how it all happened. You know, you actually... It's hard to believe. I mean, when we first used to go to Bathurst, we didn't even have accommodation. I used to organise our Sydney zone people, would get half a dozen caravans and put them in the pits, and we'd all share the caravans. Then later on one day, I happened to be going past the Bathurst Lodge Motel, and they were building a whole new wing, and I actually went in there and I said, look, can we book some rooms? And they said no. I said, well, what about if we booked the whole wing? And they said yes. So I immediately rang finance department, got a cheque sent up, and we booked the whole wing, and that's how we got accommodation, because otherwise we would have still been in the pits in a caravan, you know. And that's all changed now. You look how professional some of the racing teams are now. It's totally different. But it was a lot of fun. We sort of did things differently. I mean, I got to say, from a General Motors point of view, we were in motor racing to sell motor cars. We weren't a Formula One team where with Formula One they're in motor racing for motor racing's sake. We were there to sell motor cars, and that's the thing you got to understand, you know.
And obviously with the XU1, that finished its life in 1973, and 1974 came the new model.
Yep.
So that was obviously a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, look, even though we won the race in 72, Harry said to me, Joe, wonderful winning, but it's probably the worst thing we ever did, because now everybody expects the XU1 to win again and again and again. And obviously, those of you who know Bathurst, especially the back up the hill, I mean, there used to be a saying only cubic money beats cubic inches, but really, you know, it was a dream thing that happened. And that's when, if we talk about the old V8 supercar situation, Harry came to me and said, Joe, we won it once, there's no bloody way we're going to win it again. And I said, well, why not? He said, well, have a look at it. Anyway, cut a long story short, Harry said, I want to fit a V8 to the XU1. And I said, oh, Jesus, yeah, here we go. So, and you got to understand, the situation was the corporation wasn't in racing. So I've gone to my boss, who was John Bagshaw. He was the director of marketing. A very, very progressive man, I've got to say. John Bagshaw was wonderful. He's dead now, but he was terrific. And we tried I went to Bags, and Bags said to me, okay, well, we'll try 253, but keep it quiet. So I said, Harry, okay, put a 253 and away we go. Which we did, and Peter took a 202 XU1 and the 253 to Calder for the day, and he came back to us and said, look, quite honestly, you're wasting your time. The cars, there was hardly any difference in the cars. So I went back and I said, well, you know, like it's really a waste of time, waste of money. So Harry being Harry, and I don't know how many of you know Harry, but Harry never gave up. Harry came in and he called everyone cock. That was his favourite saying. He come back to me and said, listen, cock, if a 253 fits under that bonnet, a 308 will go in there. And I thought, oh, Jesus, here we go. Now, how do I get this past the corporation? So back I go to Bags, who was my boss, and I said, look, John, you know, this is what Harry said, 253s. Peter said it's a waste of time putting all this effort into a 253. So Bags said, what do you think? I said, well, look, I think we should give it a go. So he said, okay, but we'll do it on a need-to-know basis only. So anyway, cut a long story short, we actually put a 308 in a car, and Harry ran it a couple of times as a sports sedan. And then we decided that we would build 3 prototype cars. They were actually GTRs. They weren't XU1s, because we used the GTRs because the accelerator linkage on the GTR was a lot easier to hook up to the V8. Whereas the XU1s had the triple bloody carburetors and all the bits and pieces. Anyway, we built 3 cars. One of them was my company car, and that had that actually got stolen in the end. It's still on the stolen list, but and it wasn't me that stole it. But what happened? We finished up putting bonnet pins on that car, and I actually bought 2 great big, dirty big padlocks, Lockwood padlocks, because I used to park the car in the plant, and we didn't want anyone in the plant opening the bonnet to see the 308 engine in it. So Larry Perkins actually was working for Harry in those days, and Larry nicknamed it the Lockwood Special, which it's all over the place. Anyway, cut a long story short, we went with it. We had all the engineers. The engineers were releasing everything, and it was all going to go. And then, bugger me, Evan Green, who was a journo in Sydney, had written a story for the motoring column at the back, and there was some big story about Billy McMahon and Sonia McMahon or something going to go on the front page, and that fell over. So the motoring editor grabbed this other story and said to Evan Green, ring the Federal Minister for Transport and get a quote. And this bloody guy, his name was Morris, he's gone off his tree. He said, you guys are going to kill every 17-year-old in Australia. You know? And he's gone bananas. And of course, you've got to understand, back in those days, probably 80% of our business was fleet and government business. So, you know, we had to be pretty nice to the government, because we sold federal government, state government, local government. We had contracts with all of them, and they had a lot of power over us. And this guy rang our managing director, one bloke who was called Bill Gibbs, who was probably the most conservative person you've ever met in your life. As far as he was concerned, General Motors should only ever build white station wagons that prams could fit in. That's it. He didn't want the Monaro, he didn't want the Torana, he didn't want anything. And anyway, he killed the program. He rang Bags and said, Bags, we're out of it. Because Bags rang me and said, get those cars back. I rang Harry, it's finished. So we brought the cars back, brought them back to Lang Lang. Supposedly they were supposed to go in the barrier test, because that's the sort of promise we made to the government, that we would destroy the cars and they wouldn't be released. Now, some people do say they've got those cars. Now, I don't know. I don't argue with people anymore. I'm too old for that. But I know there's a guy in Tasmania who reckons he's got the pink car, and that's how it sort of all fell over. Now it's interesting, because this Bill Gibbs, we had a series of American managing directors, and politically at the time there was a lot of pressure about Australians becoming chiefs of big corporations. So the General Motors looked around and they brought this Bill Gibbs, and he was actually the commissioner of for the Victorian Railways. And he wasn't a car person. He was quite a nice guy, but not a car person. And in fact, for those of you who know, we actually built a little sports car, the GTR I. And he actually killed that for us too. We built 2 of those, and I used to also run the motor shows, and we took that car all around Australia, including Bathurst, and we took it to the concourse at Surfers Paradise, and the thing won its class. And we used to get people come up to the motor show and want to put a deposit on it, and Bill said, no, we only build white station wagons. So that was it.
So obviously you had to go with the new model coming up in 74. How did that go?
Yeah, well look, by then, what happened, I don't know how many of you know how a corporation works 5 years ahead. Our model lineup was always 5 years ahead. So we were actually working on the SLR 5000 by then anyway, so we knew it was coming. So it got to the stage, I know a lot of people talk about XU2 and all that. XU2 was never going to happen. I was on the product committee for General Motors, and Styling put up a proposal that the car be called the XU2, but we'd knocked that back. And if it had been released, it was going to be the V8 XU1. But by then, it had finished, and we'd moved on, and we then obviously finished up with a V8 anyway. And when you think about the power of the cars these days, I mean, those supercars weren't anything super special, but everyone thought we were going to all kill each other, you know.